Welcome to Shattered Reality with your hosts Kate Valentine and Farusha. Prepare to have your paradigms shifted and your truths questioned. And now, Shattered Reality.
Hey, Kate. Hey, Kate.
Yeah. Yes, I'm here.
You're
That's
there.
the dog's name, too. Kate, in. In. Yes, I'm here.
Okay. Well, we've got quite a zoo
There
here
you go.
today. We've got Sasquatch and Kate's dog Kate and Farusha
Yes.
here. So here we are on
Yes.
Shattered Reality. You want to slate for us, Kate?
Yeah, I would say today is just another great, beautiful day here in northern New Jersey. Absolutely gorgeous. Month of May 8, 2018. And we are with you again. Which episode is this now? My God.
So
It must be like...
It's 68, I believe. I
think so.
It's the 68th show of our wonderful Shattered Reality podcast with
All
Kate
right.
Valentine and Farusha. We're here today on a beautiful spring day, which is spring the way it should be. It's only just warm. It's not red hot and it's not snowing. So we're in great luck today. We're also in great luck to have a gentleman with us who is a wonderful author. He has written a number of books, one of which we're going to speak about today, but he is the author of, at least 5 other books, maybe more, that a lot of them are about Texas and what the history of Texas. But today we will include some of the history of Texas when we talk about Monster Hike, a 100-mile inquiry into the Sasquatch mystery with Avrel Seale. Now, Avrel, are you there?
I am.
Avrel is a fabulous author, as I said, and he has a very strange title, as far as I know. I haven't heard anybody with this title before. He works at the University of Texas as a messaging architect, which, in other words, is a writer, right, Avril?
That's correct.
Okay.
Yeah. And it's a common title in marketing circles, and I'm part of the university's communication office, but specifically the marketing arm of that. And so that was a title that was offered to me about a year ago or so.
Do you mind if I get in touch with you at another time so you could give me one of these wonderful titles that I can add to my business card?
No problem.
Intuitive
That's great.
consultant and raconteur. I don't know, but you can figure one out for me.
It sounds very new age, but it's basically I'm a kind of an all-purpose writer and editor there for university-wide communications.
So, let me just sort of bring the audience into the story here that you have written. You were going to be 50 years old. This happened sometime in the fall. It was reasonably recently you were going to be 50, and you did turn 50, in fact, and we're happy you did. But the whole idea about turning 50 was you wanted to do something groundbreaking, something you'd remember your birthday, and you didn't want to jump out of a parachute, jump out like George H.W. Bush when he was 90, jumped out of an airplane. You decided that would be a bad idea, and it would be over too quickly, if I'm recalling correctly.
Yep, that's right. Yeah.
And so why don't you tell us what you decided to do?
Well, as you say, it was kind of leading up to my 50th birthday, and the one thing that I can do is walk, and I'm not a great athlete in any other kind of way. I've tried, I've jogged a little bit. I've done a couple of short triathlons, but I'm an outdoorsman and a scouting dad, and love to be outside, and so. Decided to do this hike, and there are a couple of kind of marquee hikes in North America. One of them is the Appalachian Trail, of course, and the other one is the Pacific Crest Trail. But those are, each in excess of over 2,000 miles or so. And I didn't have 6 months to knock off of work and do this. I had a week basically of vacation time, but I wanted to do all of something. I wanted to be able to say it, that I could do all of something. And so I set out to hike what's called the Lone Star Trail, and it's in East Texas. It's about an hour north of Houston. And it stretches all the way across Sam Houston National Forest. We've got 4 national forests in Texas, and that's the southernmost one. And so that's what I decided to do.
Cool. Well, that sounds like an interesting idea. And one of the reasons, oh dear, we've got, whose dogs are those?
Not mine.
Not yours. Okay. Well,
All
call
quiet
off
here.
the hounds.
Sorry
Kate,
about
call
that.
off the hounds.
Yeah, sorry about that.
So
But,
one,
if I don't mind, Avril, usually we don't think of Texas as being forested, and East Texas, especially north of Houston. There's a lot of forest there. I'm very ignorant. I'm sorry. I'm from New Jersey.
Now that's-
Once you get past the Mississippi, forget. But
well, it's all the same, right?
yeah,
Rockies,
but-
desert. Now Texas is very has about 5 different, very distinct ecosystems, and in the Hollywood version of Texas is really West Texas, and that's
Right,
the
okay.
tumbleweed and the occasional canyons, and there are mountains out there and so forth. But East Texas is not very different from Louisiana, of course,
Oh, okay.
because
Okay.
they share a border, and so.
Sure.
Arkansas, eastern Oklahoma, East Texas, all kind of the same biome there, and which is relatively flat, lots of rainfall, in excess of probably 50 inches a year of rainfall.
Wow.
And so that's why we're talking about this because it's got the right biological prerequisites.
for Sasquatch.
The right prerequisites for Sasquatch.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay.
So that
All
was
right.
what you had been out a couple of times with your 3 sons on a day hike and your older son on an overnight hike in the Sam Houston National Forest, and you feel as though you found that there may have been signs of Sasquatch. Signs of Bigfoot. Now, at this point, I have to ask you a question.
Sure.
Why are Bigfoots called Bigfoots and not Big Feet?
that is the $64,000 question, isn't it? I actually addressed that in the book, and it's just because Big Feet doesn't. Neither one of them sound right, really. That's why I kind of opt for Sasquatches.
Could use the Germanic ending and make it in the end, Bigfootin'.
That's another option, but
I'm sorry, I don't want
that
to.
sounds like a verb, doesn't it, or a gerund?
It does, but I take the Bigfoot idea quite seriously. Now, I am not a believer, nor am I a disbeliever. I have not experienced a meeting with Sasquatch myself, but I happen to know somebody who is a somewhat of a world-famous mime, believe it or not, who is about your age, Avril, and who experienced a one-on-one, first-hand Bigfoot sighting in White Meadow Lake, New Jersey, I would say about 35 years ago.
Wow.
Now, what did you
they're
describe
there.
as a Bigfoot? So did you have any prior interest before you took this midlife crisis type hike?
I did, and I grew up in the '70s, and it was part of popular culture back then.
Right.
So I was well aware of the phenomenon, $6 Million Man, the Patterson Gimlin film.
Yeah.
Was shot in October of 1967, which incidentally was the year that I was born.
Okay.
So I was well aware of it, and I had always had kind of a steady interest in it, and it had been growing, I would say, over the 10 years or so before I took this hike. So I was online. I was aware of the spread of them, the distribution of them.
So you saw the Patterson Gimlin film. Everybody, I think, that's interested in the paranormal, who is over 35 years old, has probably seen that film. Of Was very important, groundbreaking film of the Sasquatch, and some people say it was a hoax. Other people, such as yourself, found it to be very real. Would you like to explain why you thought it was real vis-a-vis the joints on the creature?
Well, sure. There, a lot of people, several people, I should say, have come forward and claimed that it was them in the suit. But the longer that film is around and the closer it's studied, the more realistic it's found to be, and the harder it is to believe that this is something that was concocted. For one thing, the photogrammetry has shown that the creature was 7'3", I believe. I may be off an inch there, but National Geographic had a documentary in which they got to the site. They looked at landmark trees at the site, replicated the lens that was used, and they concluded that the figure was over 7 feet tall.
Wow.
And it also left a trackway of 14.5-inch prints. And so also there's, as you mentioned, the arms and legs are jointed or are breaking in points that are unlikely or almost unreplicable for a human being. And so while at first it seems like, oh, this is a creature walking on two legs and swinging its arms, obviously it's a human in a suit. When you look closer and you really do the math and the geometry on it, there's just something odd about it. And what's odd is that the creature's back step is very pronounced, and its arms are longer as a percentage of its total height than human arms. And of course, there have been a lot of fake Bigfoot videos over the years, but that's the fastest way to tell a fake from one that's plausible or one that's probably authentic, is that this business of the arm length, the arm ratio, because it's just hard to fake that even in a costume.
And the ones that are considered to be real are walking through the forest in the manner of an indigenous American or a person that even in Europe or on the steppes of Eurasia would be stepping toes and ball of the foot first and followed by heel, rather than walking like a city person who strikes their heel on the ground first. Is that correct?
Well, that's right. Yeah, it's called there are a couple of different characteristics to the gait, but it's called a compliant gait. And I don't go too much into this in the book, but the trackways, Sasquatch trackways, are inline trackways. In other words, if you or I were to walk in the snow, you would see a left foot and a right foot zigzagging back and forth. A Sasquatch typically, it's like they're walking on a tightrope. The feet are left and right, obviously, but they are in line with each other. And when you think about it, that makes a lot of sense for a bipedal animal that's extremely heavy, in which the legs need to be more centered under the center of mass than they are in a human being. Because we're so much more light-boned and small, we can afford this sort of left and right zigzagging pattern. But in their case, it's very much in line because they have to support this huge amount of weight.
And how much would you speculate that they would weigh, like an adult male, let's say?
Well, I think adult males are probably. This this is this is a lot of speculation, and I want to be modest about how much we're able to know, but people that study this harder than I do would not rule out 900 pounds as kind of a
Ooh.
ballpark. The females seem to be between 7 and 8 feet tall,
Mm-hmm.
and of about 500 pounds probably. That's the estimate for Patty, the subject of the Patterson-Gimlin film, who was a female, by the way.
If breasts
And
have anything to do with it anyway.
it is, yeah, that's right. Breasts and booty. But so typically, I mean, from the sighting reports, of which there have been about 10,000 across North America over the last century or so, females consistently are reported to be 7 to 8 feet tall, males 8 to 10 feet tall.
Wow.
And so, just as a point of reference for people that might have lost sight of this, most ceilings in an American home are 8 feet tall. So that would be about the minimum of a male Sasquatch, and so it's quite a terrifying idea
To run
to,
into in Sam
to
Houston National
yeah,
Forest.
that's right. And of course, kind of I will say, I will not string people along. I have not seen a Bigfoot either. You haven't, and I haven't either. But I have an awful lot of evidence, I think, including photographs of footprints, the best one of which is on the cover of the book. So I'm laying all my cards on the table
Okay.
about this. And in that footprint, for people that haven't seen it, is 18 inches long and 9 inches wide. So my foot is, I wear a size 10.5 men's shoe.
Pretty
And my
standard
shoe,
for a guy, right? That's about average for a guy.
something like that. Yeah, maybe a little bit on the short side, but I'm 6'2", so it's a pretty average sized foot, and it looks like a toddler's shoe compared
I
to
see
this
it.
trend.
I'm looking at the cover of the book right
Yeah,
now, and I
yeah,
see it. And you mentioned these triangles quite a bit during the book, that you saw numbers of them during
right.
your hike.
I did.
And so you spent 4 nights and 3 nights with your brother during the hike. Could you explain what you did out there exactly?
Sure. Well, the total hike was 8 days, and so the book is divided up into those parts, or kind of there's a good bit of the book that's just preparation for the hike and kind of setting up. What is a Sasquatch? Why do I believe they're real? Why do I believe that they're all over the United States and not just in California and Oregon and Washington and so forth? So, but about a third of the way through the book, we do get to the hike itself, and that was 8 days. I spent 3 nights camping, which is I had intended to spend all 7 nights and 8 days camping, but I had an experience on the first night that was quite disturbing and caused me to want to come off the trail on night 3. And so I spent nights 3, 4, 5, and 6 in a nearby town of Montgomery, which is kind of a bedroom community in the greater northern Houston area. And with my brother, who had come over from San Antonio and had rented a house, or rented a room at an Airbnb house, and so he was kind enough to take me in for those nights, because I basically didn't believe that I could handle 7 nights
By
with what was
yourself,
going
yeah.
on. Yeah.
Well, you did quite a long hike. I remember you had mentioned 44,000 steps a day. Now, I wear this little device on my wrist, and I'm trying to get 10,000 steps a day. And for me to get more than 15,000 steps a day is quite unusual. So 44,000 steps, I take my hat off to you.
Thank you.
Speaking of which, what the heck is a toque? You mentioned
Oh, it's
this thing about having a toque. Is it a watchman's cap? Is it what we call here, if we were in Brooklyn, a cupolini? What is a toque?
well, it's it's funny that you uh, highlight that because I realized after I had gone to press, I finally found uh, the word in print, and I had misspelled it in the book, but the real spelling is Tuque.
Oh, a
Um,
toque, like a
not
chef's toque.
it's a knitted hat. It's just
Oh,
a knitted cold weather hat,
okay. It's a
like
watchman's hat. Okay.
like you would wear skiing or something like that. Or some of them have the yarn balls on top of them, and so that's what we call a toque here. And I don't know where I picked that up. I guess I picked it up from the Great White North, which is that SCTV bit
Oh.
back in the day, because they were always wearing Bob and Doug or whatever
Yes,
their
Bob and
names were.
Doug.
Were always talking about their toques, toques this and toques that.
When they weren't
So
talking
that's
about their beer. But
yeah, exactly. Elsinore.
so, I found your book was a pleasure to read because it was well written, and
Thank
it was well written in a way that there were basically it flowed, and you brought in a lot of local color. You brought in a lot about your family history in that area of Texas, and even began to talk about some of the other wildlife and give some very interesting information, for instance, about the pygmy shrew, I believe, that you found dead on the
Oh, right,
walkway, and
right.
quite frankly, a lot of these details were interesting
Well, thank you. I
and
appreciate that.
made it was, I do read a bunch of different books for Shattered Reality podcast, and some of them are highly technical with a lot of p-values and graphs and stuff like that, which I find very interesting, but it's makes reading a little bit, you have to go back and read again because I'm not a scientist. And others, some of the UFO books, unfortunately, are grammatically in very bad shape. I'm not the greatest writer in the world, but some people really need an editor. But you were excellent, and that is because you are a professional writer. That is your
Well,
trade, and so it was a pleasure to read the book. I guess what we'll talk about is maybe you want to like give us the couple of high points where you felt like there was some contact with the Bigfoot.
hmm
I,
Sure. Well, we can talk about night. Well, let me back up just a little bit
sure.
to 1 year earlier, which is one of those trips that you mentioned. This was January 4th of 2016, um, and it was actually not quite a year before the hike. And a friend of mine and I have this tradition of going somewhere and camping on or around New Year's, that break, that traditionally between Christmas and New Year's.
Mm-hmm.
And we went out about 2.5 miles down the Lone Star Trail from the western terminus of it, near the town of Richards. And it was a cold, obviously cold because it was January, but a very still winter morning. He and I were both hammock camping,
Uh-huh.
and we had chosen a little pond, a little scenic little pond, right near the trail. Set up camp there, gone to sleep, and then at 6 in the morning, I was awake. I think I probably needed to go to the restroom, but I wasn't getting out of my sleeping bag just yet.
Uh-huh.
And I heard this loud crack on the other side of him. So in the forest, about, let's say, 50 yards or so on the other side of him. He didn't hear it at all because he was down inside of his sleeping bag with his toque on, as we say. And so I heard this, and then about a half a second elapses, and about a quarter of a mile away, I hear this double knock.
Uh-huh.
And this is one of those things where if you didn't know what you were hearing, you could write it off to all kinds of things. You could say, well, it was was cold, and it was just branches breaking, because branches break all the time in the forest. But I had studied this phenomenon enough to know that what I was hearing was communication between two Sasquatches.
Uh-huh.
And I believe that the first one, that close crack that I heard, was one discovering us, because we were blocking it from the pond. And like all nocturnal creatures, they go to water at the beginning of their shift and at the end of their shift. They're working the night shift.
Uh-huh.
And so like coyotes or deer or anything else that's active overnight, they get a big drink when they get started, and then they drink before they go to bed when the sun comes up. And I think that they were coming in to water, and so to me it was a very clear communication. It was, hey, heads up, humans over here. And then another one farther away, like I say, about a quarter of a mile away, saying "gotcha" or "roger that" or something like that.
Interesting.
And so I was really struck by it. And I had heard, I had also been out there with my son on an earlier trip and heard what I believe to be a howl. This is another phenomenon that people report all the time in conjunction with Sasquatch sightings, are these howls. And again, this was about at sundown, so it would have been, kind of at the beginning of the shift, that one. And so in four trips out there, twice I had heard something that I couldn't explain or thought was highly suspicious.
Mm-hmm.
And so I knew going in that there was, if I was going to spend 7 nights in a row out there, 8 days in a row out there, there was a good chance I was going to see or hear something, because my batting average was 500, just for a guy who didn't really know much about what he was doing, and had just gone 4 times. I had already gotten 2 hits on there, so that's what really piqued my interest in this particular area. And then I started looking online, and there were over 50 reports in the 5-county area, in the county that I first heard this a howl in, and the 4 surrounding counties, over 50 reports over many years. And then I started listening to this other podcast, and there are lots of research groups that are looking at this. In fact, I went back over there a few months ago in January, and there are now not 1 but 2 highways running through the forest that are adopted by Bigfoot research groups.
Oh, wow. Well, I know that you had mentioned in the book a film of that somebody had come into a broken up camp and felt
Yes.
like there were several people that had gone missing and presumed dead. Were you able to verify any of that in the interim?
Well, I wasn't, but I will tell you something that's not in the book, which is on that trip that I took in this January, which it was on New Year's Day this January. The same friend and I went back out there,
Uh-huh.
and this was after the book had come out.
Okay.
And so this was all new to us, and we went to a place that's notorious for Sasquatch sightings, which is called Kelly Pond, and it's one of the 3 developed campgrounds in the Sam Houston National Forest. And there were a few people parked along the road, kind of outside this camp, and then there was an RV inside the camp, and then there was a tent right near the pond. And I took a lot of comfort from the fact that, hey, there's this tent that's near the pond. This guy had a fishing pole, and he had been, like, his flip-flops were out there, and but it was quite cold. That night it was the forecast was 19 degrees.
Oh.
And but my friend and I were just game for going, and wanted to make this happen. So we took our warmest gear, and we're gonna tent camp there. And we kept seeing this other campsite that was right near the pond, like 20 feet from the pond or so. And we kept thinking, wow, I wonder when that guy is ever, if he's out on a day hike, I wonder, we just didn't see anybody around there, but we saw all his stuff there. And so we hiked around the pond at sundown, and there were a couple of young ladies that were in this RV that we said, and we talked about, hey, well, there's somebody that's camping over there. Have you seen them? And they had not seen him for 3 days. They had been there for 3 days, and they hadn't seen anybody there either. Now, there was no car there, and that the whole campsite looked like it had been just abandoned. There was food in a pot. There was high dollar fishing gear. There was a high dollar camp stove that was just left out.
High dollar, you mean expensive? Is that
Yes.
a local? Yeah, okay.
Yeah. Sorry.
I thought it might be a brand name. I just wanted to be clear.
I don't know what our regional cultural differences are here, but yeah, it was an expensive. There were several $100s worth of camping equipment there that apparently had just been abandoned.
Wow.
And Bob Garrett, the guy who I quote a lot in the book, said, and the one who shot this film that's on YouTube called The Torn Up Camp, says that he comes across this situation in the forest all the time, that people will just up and abandon tents and camping equipment in the hundreds of dollars.
I have to
doesn't seem likely.
Stop you for just a moment and remind that our listeners that on our last podcast we had a very interesting gentleman named Terry Lovelace who had abandoned a whole bunch of camping equipment when he went camping in Arkansas while he was in the service with he was out camping with his friend, a guy that drove an ambulance with him. He was an EMT in the Air Force, and he was in a national forest in Arkansas, and he had a major UFO sighting. And these guys, they were also whooped up in the flying saucer in the UFO, and so when they got back down to Earth, they booked out of there. They left in a big hurry, left all their camping equipment, their camp stove, everything behind. And for them, it was an amazing outlay of money because they were just servicemen, not high ranking or anything, just sergeant and whatever is underneath sergeant there, the two of them. And they left their entire gear out in the national forest. So there could be more than one reason for leaving your gear in the national forest, including a grizzly, I guess. But there are no grizzlies down there in Florida, not Florida, in Texas, are there? No.
No bears at all, unless it's West Texas and they come up from Mexico into the Big Bend region. But that's not in East Texas.
So, this was a trip that you took this year, and you found this abandoned campsite. And what did Bob Garrett have to say about it?
Well, I have not talked to him. I would love to talk to him, but we have, the torn up site that he found was very disturbing indeed, and it was not very far. It was several miles, but no more than 5 miles. The site that's purported to be the torn up camp is about 5 miles from this pond where we were. So I don't know what his opinion would be of it, but he would undoubtedly, I think, say that this was typical of what he sees, and it was clear to us, that this guy just left in a huge hurry and didn't come back, and there was stew left in the pot. Nothing had been cleaned. I mean, it was, and it was interesting. I finally got up the nerve to go over there and open the tent, and because I wasn't sure, does this guy does he have a heart attack and just die here? So I didn't know what we were going to find. So I opened the tent, and it was an odd sight. There were, nobody was there, but there were these stacks of batteries inside the tent. And I didn't quite know what to make of that. And I got to thinking about it later, and my best guess is that he was out there restocking trail cameras, either for deer or as a Sasquatch research, because people will do that. They'll set up cameras, all over North America, to try to catch one on video. And so he could have been out doing that, or he could have been restocking batteries in trail cams for deer hunting too.
Sure.
And just gotten surprised by one of these things and was just out of there.
Well,
we did not sleep any better for knowing that campsite that we thought was such a comfort originally to us was actually an abandoned site. So again, this is more confirmation of Garrett's whole view of the forest and everything that's going on in it.
so what I want to talk about with you, because you are one of our only cryptozoologically motivated type guests, my adventures in cryptozoology are limited to having seen these giant black butterflies that don't actually exist. And I saw them with several other people during one day, 1 October a few years ago. But as far as any larger animals cryptozoologically, I don't have any experience, but I do have an open mind to things, and while I do not believe, I also do not believe. So we have to talk a little bit about the cryptozoological community in the U.S., which seems somewhat fractured by my estimation. I always thought the ufological UFO community was argumentative and sometimes petty and, fighting with one another and making outrageous claims from time to time. And you try to sift the wheat from the chaff in that venue. And then looking at the cryptozoological community, they're worse. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I'm a big fan of somebody you mentioned in the book. I'm a big fan of David Paulides. I think he's a very interesting researcher, and I know, and you had mentioned this in the book, that he had some samples of Sasquatch hair and other things, and he had them sent to a woman who did some genetic research on them, and found out that the hair samples exhibited some human characteristics, like the mother's haplogroup was human, whereas the father's group, which is a genogroup, was unknown hominid or something to that effect. And so it would give the indication that Sasquatch is part human, part other, and this has been going on, according to the woman's research, for 10,000 years back. Is that basically the gist of the situation?
That's what the claim is, and I think she says 15,000 years.
Okay.
Based on the molecular rate of mutation. Now this is obviously highly controversial. There are a lot of people, even in the Bigfoot community, if you can call it that, or Bigfoot enthusiasts who don't buy this study. There are some who do. There's some who don't. Needless to say, mainstream science rejects it out of hand. But for my part, I found it to be fairly credible just on the face of it. That when you ask what are these things, well, they're clearly more than just upright gorillas. I think that they're much closer, orders of magnitude closer to humans than any of the other great apes. Although they, morphologically, just based on the length of their limbs, the way that they're built, the way that they ambulate, they seem to occupy a kind of a halfway point between humans and other great apes. But if you look if you look at things like the foot, well, the foot, there are 5 toes that are all aligned and forward facing, as opposed to opposable toes of gorillas. So there's some clues that we don't have to even look at genetics to see that just morphologically how similar they are in many ways to humans. And then through eyewitnesses, we know that they have hooded noses like ours.
Mm-hmm.
They don't have upward facing nostrils like the great apes do. And so there's a lot just in those 2 examples. You can see it's probable and certainly plausible that there's some sort of hybridization event that has happened.
I know that in the Northwest, the indigenous Americans that live there are of the opinion that this is a human in the forest, a hairy human in the forest. Basically, they respect the idea of a Sasquatch, and they consider it entirely realistic, if you will. On the other hand, my cohorts to the west of us here in Pennsylvania, not too very far away, have all kinds of sightings that are related to UFOs and Bigfoots. And I can't get my mouth around saying Bigfoots for some reason. But in any case, they sort of equate them with UFOs. And there are people who think they're flesh and blood creatures, and there are people who think that they are not. And I know with you, a lot of your work on the subject starts with you believing that there are Bigfoots, right? I mean, their belief is there that you believe that there are Bigfoots, and that makes it easier for you to recognize the howls or the knocks and so forth.
That's right.
And belief has always been for me a difficult word, not because I don't have them, everybody does, or you wouldn't be able to find your way into the kitchen because you believe it's down the hallway, right?
That's right. Exactly.
So there is a certain amount of things that are, we could say they're knowns. And so I would draw a line between beliefs, as in, a belief in a religion or anything that you haven't seen or experienced very straight on, and knowns, like we know where the kitchen is, purportedly in our house.
Right.
But
Consensus reality.
Yeah, consensus reality. But then there's you're a very well-read gentleman, and I'm sure you know the idea of a tulpa, right?
Oh, I'm sorry, but what?
Tulpa. Do you know the concept of a tulpa?
No.
All right.
Enlighten me.
Okay. Tulpas, the word, I believe, comes from the Himalayan mountains, maybe Nepal, that sort of Tibetan Buddhism kind of area, maybe north of India, northern India, where some of the adepts, we'll call them, I don't want to call them swamis, that sort of sounds ridiculous, but the adepts in that region could think very hard about something, about a creature, sort of like in Jewish mysticism, the golem. Okay, am I hitting you on any of this? You aware of any of this? Okay.
I have heard a little on a previous show of yours. I heard a little bit of a discussion of this idea, but go ahead.
And some time ago, and I'm going to be at a loss for the right word involving this, but a group of people in North America, they may have been in southern eastern Canada, and they called up a spirit that didn't exist, basically. And that spirit took on a personality and a name. I think it was called Philip. And it actually began to have like a presence that it started to answer questions on the Ouija board. It made EVP sounds, and it's called one of the things it's called is the Philip experiment. And so this was an example, a modern day example of a tulpa. There was also a woman who was an explorer in India, and she apparently decided that she needed a butler or someone like that. And she created a tulpa. She was a spiritual student in India, northern India, and she created a tulpa, and she had a hard time getting rid of it. I think that
Be careful what you ask for, right?
exactly. Jack Parsons, about whom was the one of the people who founded part of NASA, and out in California, he had done some experiments and apparently may have created a tulpa. So, what's your thoughts about that? Do you think that the Bigfoot could be, you could raise one up as a tulpa, or do you think that's totally off the wall and under the table?
Well, I have never thought about that before, but I kind of, I guess, just as a religious matter, and I know that we don't really talk about religion on this show, but I guess that my opinion is that God can make a spirit, and that's about it. And I think that when I'm talking about as far as inspiration or faith or belief is much more down to earth. And I think the key sentence, I actually went and found this in the book earlier, which is a quote from St. Augustine, who says, faith is to believe what you do not see. The reward of this faith is to see what you believe. So it's not that I created Bigfoots out there by believing that they exist. It's that I believed, and therefore I knew what to look for and what to listen for, and therefore I found evidence.
I respect that.
So
I do. I respect that. Yes. It's
a much more down to earth explanation.
Yes, it is.
Kind of my view.
The tulpas are a little bit more exotic, I would say. I just threw that out as a talking point about the tulpas.
It's a fair question, and I will say that one thing that this whole experience has really taught me is to just reserve judgment on anything like that. I think there's a tendency to what I say in the book is use binary thinking, that either we understand something or it doesn't exist. And I think that's a mistake. I think there's a lot out there that exists that we don't yet understand. I mean, I think that's the premise of a lot of your episodes, if not the whole show.
Yes, absolutely. I agree. I also despise binary thinking to a very large extent, and I agree with you 100% about that. And I have to say to you, even though I throw out these little talking points, I don't know what Bigfoot is or isn't. I could not begin to tell you what it is or isn't. Another interesting idea, however, is that Bigfoot is a flesh and blood creature, but that comes through a portal area. And that is why they're sometimes associated with UFOs, which are also considered to sometimes come through a portal. And that seems to me to be almost a more interesting concept and could explain the disappearance of Bigfoot, where, once you see him and then you don't. And that sort of is a theory that intrigues me, let us say. But I do not think I would want to get into a controversy over Bigfoot, which I don't, who I don't know much about.
Well, right. And you'll find, the more people that you talk to, that there's a whole spectrum of beliefs about what it is and what it's capable of. That run from it's basically that it is an upright gorilla that is basically just very good at avoiding people, to what you're talking about, that they're associated with UFOs, they're associated with these orbs of light that people have spotted in the forest, that they can vanish into thin air. So there's a whole range of beliefs. And one thing that I do say in the book is that everybody tends to believe that they know where the line is between crazy and not crazy. And I'm just very slow to accuse anyone of not seeing what they say they saw.
Right.
If you say that a purple dragon flew out of the sky and landed on your front yard and ate your petunias and then flew back off, I would say, well,
Maybe.
that's very interesting. Do you have any theories about that? Why do you think that was? You know, I'm not here to tell people that they didn't see what they say they saw.
I'm with
I
you
say-
100% on that.
I say, come up with a theory, test it, and let's go from there. I mean, that's how knowledge grows. Not just by slamming the door on everything and
Well-
saying, "Well, that's crazy."
We like our guests to be sincere, and I think you're very sincere, and I think that there's a lot to learn about Bigfoot. Seriously, I do think so, and I hope that you will keep us posted about your doings if you write another Bigfoot book or something else about the paranormal area. I hope you'll keep us in mind. And if you wouldn't mind right now, repeat your website, your book name, and any other items
Sure.
of interest that we need to know.
Well, thank you so much for having me on, Farusha. It's been a real honor. And the name of the book is Monster Hike, a 100-mile inquiry into the Sasquatch mystery. And my website is Avrel, that's A-V as in Victor, RELSEALE.wordpress.com. The name of the blog is called the Trailhead, which was just kind of coincidental. It's about all kinds of things. It's not just about paranormal. It's a site for my poetry. It's a site for photography. So lots of different things on there. But the latest thing that is on is a link to the book and some bonuses, some pictures from the hike that I've put up that are in color as opposed to the black and white ones that you'll find in the book, and some I call them monster hike bonuses.
Well, he's a good writer, ladies and gentlemen, and all friends, human and quasi-human out there. I'm joking, but he is a wonderful writer. Avril is a wonderful writer, and he also sings. I warn you, he also sings. Thank you, Avril. Thank
The
you.
warning is well taken.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right. Bye now.
Bye.
We have with us today one of our listeners who is a remarkable young lady who lives in Northern California. Whereabouts in California do you live? Just general. We don't want your address or anything. We don't want any mashers visiting you.
I live in the Napa Valley.
Okay, yeah. So you're further north, and you're not way up, but you're midway or further north in California. You're above LA, and
Oh yes,
so we have
about 9 hours.
Yes. So we have here a person, as I said, a wonderful young lady who is very interested in the paranormal, who runs around in some paranormal circles on the internet that I run around in, and is also a listener to Shattered Reality podcast. So we have here Stephanie Quick. And Stephanie is also a very fashionable lady. She creates her own fashions. And while this may not be of great interest to the paranormal community, I find it really cool.
Thank you. That's very sweet of you. Thank you.
Now, we just finished, we're in the midst right now of our 68th podcast, and you're our second guest. Our first guest was a gentleman named Avrel Seale, who wrote a book called Monster Hike, and it was a 100-mile hike into the Sam Houston National Forest near Austin, Texas. And so he went camping, and he feels that he found some good evidence of Sasquatch. So do you have any experience with that, being in an area that is closer to more sightings of Sasquatch?
You know, it was funny when you let me know today that you were going to be having a Bigfoot researcher on, because I'm headed up to Bigfoot country on Friday to Nevada City in California, which is a ghost town, and it's actually well known for being haunted. Actually, I stayed in Red Castle Inn there once, and they have a pretty famous ghost, which I got a little bit of a experience of, which was kind of interesting. But no, it's funny because you know, I do a lot of bird watching. Growing up, we were always camping up in the Sierra Nevadas, in the mountains, and both sides of my family are from the area south of Yosemite and the Sierras there in the foothills. And no one in my family has any experience of Bigfoot whatsoever. However, I will say I don't rule it out because, like I said, you know, growing up, we went camping all the time. I never saw a bear. My mom saw bears multiple times every time we went camping. So I think lots of times, you know, even with just, you know, prosaic, mundane animals, there's a certain magnetism or something where, you know, certain people will see them a lot and other people just won't. So I don't rule it out.
Well, I've seen several bears in the Northeast here, but no Sasquatch. No Sasquatch.
Not yet.
Well, we don't have to go on with the Sasquatch parts, but just wanted to find out, given that you were in an area that is, you know, somewhat known for Sasquatch, and that the Native Americans up there, the indigenous peoples, they even say this is the, you know, the old man in the forest, and they believe that they're the forest people. So, it's cool. So tell us more about your experiences, paranormal experiences.
Well, let's see. The short version is I've had a lot. I don't know, a little bit about me and my background. Just, you know, from the time I can remember, which is like I was 1.5 years old, I always just had this feeling that there was something behind reality as it was understood, and I was always just dying to know what it was. You know, like Toto, I wanted to pull that curtain back.
Oh, yes.
But I was a kid, so I didn't really have much in the way to, you know, to know how to go about. You know, I didn't know anything about enlightenment or mystical experiences or meditation or anything, because I'm 56. I'm not that young, and so this is like in the 70s. Then when I was in my teens, I became very ill, and when I was 22, I had a near-death experience.
Oh, wow.
And yeah, it was during a medical procedure. I was in convulsions for 20 minutes, and yeah, it was pretty exciting. I was running around with my eyes bugging out of my head for a couple months afterwards. And this was like in 1984, so there wasn't a lot of information about near-death experiences kind of around at that time. And then mine was of a very kind of a dark and Tibetan flavor, so, you know, I had no idea what I'd been through for several years afterwards. But I received kind of a lot of teachings and ideas and practices. And so, of course, I just jumped in with both feet on that because I was just dying to know. And then I got a taste of it, so I was even more dying to know.
So tell us more about the experience itself, Stephanie, if you wouldn't mind.
Oh, no, not at all. I don't think I've ever really told it very much to anyone except for family in whole. But so basically I had it's kind of like an asthma, bronchitis, probably autoimmune type of thing. And they were giving me like everything that they had, and it had been weeks, and I was still, you know, basically on the way out. So they decided to do this procedure where they take a bronchoscope, which is like a flexible tube with a laser in it. Okay. And they can use it to take biopsies and look down in you, and also to give medicine if they want. So they're going to put this bronchoscope up my nose and down onto my bronchi, and then spray lidocaine on it, like when you get your tooth numb at the dentist. And sometimes in some people this will calm things down and kind of break the cycle. So they decided to do this, and unfortunately for me, well, the doctor knew that it could be risky because I didn't have parathyroids, which control your calcium metabolism. So the lidocaine bound with all the calcium, and I went into convulsions really bad till they could get, But the interesting thing to me was my experience going into this NDE was, you know, I'm sitting, the doctor's there, you know, to get the medicine where it needs to go, you need to inhale it. And so you're inhaling this liquid, healing medicine that is coming down from your head into your lungs, and you could see this bright like red light because the laser's so strong in your chest. And of course, your sense of self is getting dissolved because they don't want to make these things any longer than they need to. So you're nose to nose with this doctor doing this to you. And then years later, I ended up going to a Tibetan Buddhist exhibition in San Francisco. And there was just, most of it didn't strike me, but this one black tanka of Padma Lama, who's like a protectress of the Dalai Lama. I was like, that person saw the same thing I did. And I got so worked up about it because I hadn't had any connection to anything till that point. And then so years later, when I was 33, 34, I went and lived at a Tibetan Buddhist meditation center for a while up in Kensington, California. And the first time I sat down for a Chinese meditation, I was pretty surprised because it's basically, you imagine there's this lotus on top of your head and there's this healing liquid going up from your head towards your chest, and you have this bright light in your chest and you're breathing. So it was like the same type of thing that had precipitated this NDE.
Wow.
But yes, but the experience itself was, I was just going along, and all of a sudden I was in this space that would classically be the void, which of course sounds very nice in the Heart Sutra because, it's big, but it's small, and it's loud, but it's quiet. But when you go from being in like 4-dimensional reality to some place that's completely other, it was the most I can't tell how, it was so terrifying. I just can't convey it. It was just shocking to the utmost. I mean, you don't think about how you're composed of like DNA and chemicals, but everything goes away. You're not breathing. You don't have a body. There's no gravity. So I was just in this space. Yeah. And then it was weird because it just looked kind of like an attenuated version of the night sky with a little bit of movement in it. So it wasn't visually very exciting. And I didn't really see anything, but I could sense these huge presences. It's like one but many. And they kind of were just like, we're here, but it wasn't any force. It was like complete free will. And I just said yes. And then they just started teaching me everything.
What did they teach you?
Well, this is a lot. I don't know if you ever read Robert Monroe's books.
Oh, yes. I'm a member of the Monroe Institute Professional Division, in fact. I'm very familiar with Robert Monroe. Yes, indeed.
So anyway, it took me years to figure out, but a lot of it came through what he calls rotes, which is kind of like they give you a ball of stuff and you can unwind it at your leisure.
Right, a rote, R-O-T-E.
Thank you.
That is a concept that Robert Monroe developed. And he was great with the acronyms. He had a lot of acronyms. And rote was one of them. And basically a rote is, as you said, exactly, an entire teaching that is sort of given to you as a ball of stuff that is going to unwind in your brain when you're ready to accept it.
Yeah. But so the main highlights that I took away and that I really started working on at when I kind of came back from that experience were they gave me mindfulness meditation. It was funny. I heard like pay attention. I'm sure someone was saying pay attention in that room at that point, but it was latched onto. I kept hearing it, and it was like kind of glommed onto this whole idea of mindfulness meditation, the idea that you don't need to have like a sitting practice, but that you just need to pay attention to your surroundings and your awareness at any moment. And this is going to cultivate your ability to become more aware. And as part of that, they also gave me a transmission in, there's different ways of kind of protecting yourself from outside influences. And of course, the queen is to be able to become completely neutral and without mind, right?
That's a wonderful place to be if you can get there.
It's a tall order. But they explained that to me and kind of showed me how to make that energetic move and supported me in it so that, as I pursue these practices, I wouldn't be subject to, basically, like, as they explain it, like, psychic parasites or vampires. And then the other thing that they did, and it cracks me up because, okay, so this is in 1984. I was living in Berkeley. It happened in Berkeley, California, right? Woo-woo central of all this, esoteric teachings and stuff. So basically what the other was like, these were the three main things to start with. They said, you have an organ. There's this organ is kind of like, just more subtle than the physical, but it connects your soul to your physical body. And you can strengthen this organ by walking. Now, I was already a big walker, but I became even more so. But they're like, you got to do this because you can't get better unless you get in your body and pay attention to all that stuff that's going wrong that you don't want to have to pay any attention to, but that you need to know about so you can, deal with it.
Wow, that's very interesting because I am a person who likes to walk and would like to walk even more than I do. So this is a very interesting transmission to me personally. I find to be useful. Wow.
Yeah. Yeah.
So so you had this out of body experience. You experienced the void. You got some teachings, and since then you have been involved. I've seen you on different websites, and you're involved in the UFO community as well. Have you had a UFO sighting?
No, the one thing I've never had is unidentified object in the sky, unidentified light. No, I've had missing time with entities.
Wow.
In broad daylight with no, whatever around. But I've had a taste of just about everything else.
Okay,
but,
well,
no flying saucers.
We have a few more minutes to talk with you, and maybe you would like to tell us a little bit about your missing time.
Yeah, it's kind of one of those experiences where you just kind of go, that happened, and I don't know what to say about it. But I was about 25, and so it was a few years after this NDE, and as I say again, the key to understanding this is that I walk a lot, and I've been living in this place where this happened, or down the street from where this happened, for a couple of years, and so I probably walked on this length of street, I don't know, a few hundred times by the time this happened. So I'd go out and walk every day, and at the time I wasn't working, so I didn't have a lot of demands on my time, so I just walked maybe half an hour, maybe 2 hours, just depending on how I felt. So one day I was living in Albany, and I walked up into the hills, and I was coming back down on Washington Street by Solano between Key Route and Spokane.
Okay.
And so in the space, I was just walking along. It was, as I said, it was like probably early afternoon. It was a clear sky. Within the space of probably about 12 steps, a bunch of things happened. I noticed that there was about half a block in front of me, there was like this really small kind of gnome-looking guy who was very still and like right in my line of sight. To my left and a little behind me was a lady wearing a full skirt. And it's like she'd come up and I hadn't noticed her before. And then someone to the back and to the left of me said, "What time is it?" And I heard these church bells chiming. There's a Catholic church or a Episcopal church about 7 blocks east of where I was. I was walking west, so behind me. St. Albans Episcopal Church, and they have these big, nice chimes that go all the time. And it sounded like it was right on top of me, but even if it had been going at that time, it would have been quite a distance away because like I said, I lived there. I was walking there all the time. I know how that sound would travel. It might sound closer during certain fog conditions, but not like this. Okay, so all of a sudden this is happening, and then boom, it all cuts out. None of these people are here. None of the sound is there. And it's like literally in the space of one walk.
Wow.
So I knew immediately that I'd lost some time, but I figured, well, I got all my fingers on my toes, so what can you do? And, the only thing, so it was one of those things where I just, well, that was weird, and just kind of filed it away, but I couldn't really have any idea what it meant until probably about 10 or 12 years later. I had been working in Berkeley, and I grew very close with my boss. I was very close with her when she was pregnant with her daughter. She became seriously ill, and it was kind of a creepy work environment. So I was kind of like her person on the scene while she was like in the hospital and stuff with this pregnancy. And so we grew very close. And then after her child was born, I went to her house for some business, and she lived about a half block away where this experience had taken place, which struck me because, a lot of these fae entities, gnomes, and of course the saucer occupants, there's always this linkage with babies.
Aha.
So I don't know. That's the only clue I have for you.
Well, I would say to you that the gnome entities are something that I have heard a lot about before and firsthand heard, people that I have met and so forth. In fact, Kate and I had a woman that we knew together who was a member of our little group that we haven't spoken much about. We called ourselves, there were four of us, we called ourselves the Sorcerettes. And
Fun.
we did a few programs around the local area, and we gathered together. We would have lunch together and stuff like that. And one woman, unfortunately, has passed away. And that woman, one of her introductions to this whole field of ufology, and she was very involved with ufology, had to do with her meeting this gnome person outside of a store. And it was just, it sounded a lot like what you were describing. It was sort of, time sort of stopped, but this fellow spoke to her. With your gnome, he didn't speak to you, I take it.
Not that I know of.
Okay.
If I had to guess, I'd say that, or calculate, I would say it was about 40 minutes missing. Because, as I said again, I walked there. Since then, I've walked there like probably a couple thousand times along that one stretch.
And you know how long it takes, absolutely. If it's your regular
yeah, and
walking
also
path.
you know how the sun moves.
Oh,
that's
true.
fascinating about your sorcerette friend having the gnome.
Yes, we had a lot of fun with the whole concept. I thought of the name, the Sorcerettes,
I love it.
and one of our compatriots was at the time a MUFON investigator, and I think she thought that I was making light of the whole situation, and she didn't like the idea of that. But she's a very nice person and a very dear person, and I still know her. But I thought it was hysterical, and I like to have fun. Girls just like to have fun, isn't it? That the song?
I'm on your side. I think, basically the creepy, nasty part of life will take care of itself. So maybe try and, work up a little fun.
Well, Stephanie, I want to thank you so much for being on Shattered Reality today. And
thank you so much. I really enjoyed it.
I hope to speak with you again. You are very welcome to come back on, and if you want to discuss any other experiences. But I want to thank you a whole lot for coming on, and I will be in touch with you.
Great. Thank you so much. Have a great day, and I really appreciate your time. Thank you.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Wow. So today was a really wonderful day for us here on Shattered Reality. Unfortunately, we could not keep Miss Kate Valentine on the line due to the fact that we had an echo. We're going to work on getting her back for our next podcast. So what I would like to ask you to do is to please check us out on YouTube, like us on Facebook. Let us know if you would like to be a guest in our Listener's Corner, like the wonderful Stephanie Quick just was. You can do so in writing. That is that you can submit a written report, and I'll read it, or Kate will read it on the show. Or you can be actually on the show verbally and Skype into us. If you write in, please be sure to include all the pertinent details of your experience. We'll read the encounter of your sighting, or we'll read the account of your sighting or encounter. And it could be about UFOs, orbs, beings, electronic voice phenomena, hauntings, Bigfoots. We want to hear it all. And please feel free to comment on either of our websites, on YouTube or on our Facebook page. We are at shatteredrealitypodcast.com and at shatteredrealitypodcast.wordpress.com. We have, at the current moment, 68 episodes and counting. Thank you from Shattered Reality.